All right, back again. So today is going to be a little bit of a different one, a little bit more, I guess, serious than usual on this channel, a little bit of a heavier kind of subject matter. So I decided to make a video about this because I haven't really seen that much about it on YouTube. You know, there's a couple of articles that no one's probably reading anymore. I saw, I think, 2 or 3 videos. One was from something called John Safran's Music Jamboree. This Australian dude who dedicated a section of the last episode of this show of his that I believe was broadcast on TV in Australia. So there's probably more Australians that know about this than anybody else. And then there was an American YouTuber, Skepchick or something like that. Yeah, Rebecca Watson, Skepchick. She made a video about this as well. But if you look on Reddit or anything like that, there's a little bit of discussion. Not really, it doesn't seem to have gained that much traction. And the thread about it in the Foo Fighters subreddit, anyone who's sort of critical of the band gets downvoted. So all you really see is like defense of the band in that subreddit, which I get. People want to defend Uncle Dave, I guess, and Uncle Nate, actually, because Nate Mendel, the bassist, is really the guy who was the driving force behind the Foos getting involved in this. Now, let me just say, I don't actually blame the Foo Fighters for any, I don't think that they caused millions of deaths, right? Do I think they contributed in some way? Yeah, I do. And I do think the fact that there doesn't seem to be much in the way of a public apology or retraction warrants some discussion about it. If I could find anything where Dave or Nate had made a statement saying that, they don't hold these beliefs anymore, they've educated themselves, they understand why these things are wrong, just anything along those lines, even just saying sorry, I guess, would be better than what they did, which is essentially just kind of ignore it and hope it goes away and just quietly stop supporting the group, I guess. But yeah, if they had apologized, I wouldn't feel like the need to really talk about it. And on the subreddit, it says that you see comments where people say that they've apologized or that they've retracted, whatever. But anyone who asks for a link is downvoted to hell. So I don't know if that apology is floating around out there. I haven't seen it, and someone can link it to me, and I'll gladly read it or listen to it or whatever it is. But I haven't seen anything. In fact, the only thing I did see was Mendel doubling down and, writing this disgruntled letter to Mother Jones, which is this online publication that spoke critically of him and his band. I mean, I don't know how soon his response was. It was probably like right after. But so obviously he wouldn't have changed his opinion or his beliefs by then. But it seems that the people on the subreddit think that letter is the apology. So they probably saw that he responded and assumed he said what they want him to say, and then just didn't actually read what he wrote, which was just a bunch of like AIDS denial conspiracy talking points, essentially, is what he said in that letter. So what am I actually talking about here, right? And why do I think it's relevant for me to talk about? First of all, the Foo Fighters, through their bassist Nate Mendel, supported Christine Maggiore, right, and her organization known as Alive and Well AIDS Alternatives. Now, who is this lady? She's this American activist who her whole thing is, like her book title, What If Everything You Thought About AIDS is Wrong? That's her entire premise. And it's all, the old school talking points of these AIDS deniers about how good the testing is, or about how there's no proven link between HIV and AIDS, all those kinds of things, right? She spouted all of it, and they supported her in it. Because Mendel had read her book, thought there was some truth in there, I guess, shared it with the band and convinced them, to the point where Nate Mendel himself actually organized a concert that the Foo Fighters played at, which its whole purpose was to raise support, money, awareness for this Alive and Well AIDS alternative organization of Christine Maggiore's. Now, all of that is pretty bad, right? I don't think there's many of us out there who are going to run to the defense of the band in this situation, especially when you see the clips, of them talking about it at this concert. That I couldn't find footage of this anywhere except for in this John Safran video. So I'm just going to play just little clips so you can see for yourself. It's pretty enthusiastic support for the most part.
I think that most people have been scared of AIDS. I think that most people have been sort of force-fed the idea of a death sentence.
Are you afraid of AIDS?
Am I afraid of AIDS? No. Because I'm here alive and well.
So are you afraid of AIDS, Taylor?
This is making me not so afraid, actually.
Right. So there's no question that they were vocal supporters of this organization. And as I said, no retractions, no apologies that I can find. But here's the other layer to all of this, which is what actually interested me in talking about this. This is where the millions of deaths come into the equation. Okay. So one thing for you to understand is that coming from South Africa, my country has a huge problem with, medical care in general, but HIV in particular is a pretty bad problem here in this country. Now, in the year 2000, we had a president named Thabo Mbeki, right? Now, Thabo Mbeki was a fairly well-liked president by most people's account. He seemed like a decent guy. The worst criticism that most people have of him is, maybe that he was indecisive or inactive, didn't do enough kind of thing. There wasn't really much in the way of saying criticizing his character or accusing him of doing something corrupt that I can remember. I was a kid at the time, but his reputation is generally positive. And so something of note about him is that he was the president of South Africa around the year 2000. Okay. So the internet was really becoming a big thing at the time, becoming a lot more mainstream. And he had a bit of a reputation for being very open to getting information off the internet. I think I read an article once where they said, the president sits at home reading Wikipedia all night or something along those lines, as a sort of, a dig against him. So, when you traverse the internet and its various arrays of information, the pathways that you can look at out there, you open yourself to a lot of misinformation. And he did seem to have some sympathies towards, certain aspects of HIV/AIDS denialism. And what exacerbated this as well is that the health minister at the time in South Africa, Mantu Shabalala Msimang, she also had similar beliefs and she promoted them. She had a lot of strange, weird beliefs about like eating beetroot to cure cancer and things like that. She was a very strange lady who has an entirely negative reputation in the country. She's considered pretty much a clown, you know. Our famous comedians made jokes about her. Now, these two things are not as separate as they seem, right? Because in the year 2000, Christine Maggiore was invited to, I believe it was the 13th annual AIDS conference, which was held in South Africa. So her and her crew, who were invited to attend, actually met with Mbeki, President Mbeki at the time, and with Msimang, who was the Minister of Health in South Africa at the time. So her and her group are now attending this conference, spouting these beliefs that they've basically learned from Peter Duisberg, a molecular biologist who basically started the whole train of HIV/AIDS denialism, that there was no link between the two. And this group is exerting some influence on the president and the health ministry, whether directly or indirectly. I think it's fair to say, based on the fact that they were at the conference, surely they presented some information. And as I said, you know, the president and the health minister at the time were known to be sympathetic to these beliefs. So let's lay it out, right, in what I believe is sort of the timeline of how this progressed, right? So we've got the late 90s. Nate Mandel, he's reading Maggiore's books. He's getting into it. He believes it. He passes this message on to the other band members who receive it well. They become associated with the organization. And then in January of the year 2000, the band plays at this Alive and Well benefit concert, promoting the organization. Maggiore is speaking at the events. Copies of her book are being given out, being sold at the event. You know, it's a full-on collaboration between the band and Alive and Well. Then in July of the year 2000, that is when Maggiore attends the AIDS conference in South Africa and meets with the president. Now, around this time, I believe, is when the band starts being criticized for this association with Maggiore. And in response, it seems like they quietly distance themselves from the organization. They stop promoting it on their website. They stop attending any benefit concerts, anything like that. But they, to my knowledge, don't retract anything they've said. No apologies, right? So, the year 2000 is the main sort of focus point for when their support was at its biggest. And it seems to sort of, as that year goes on and they start to hit the criticism, throughout the years 2001 to 2003, this distancing that I mentioned starts to fully dissolve, and there's no more trace of a public connection between the two at all anymore. Until the year 2004, right? This is after they've supposedly cut ties with this organization, as far as anyone knows. But in 2004, a movie is released, a movie called The Other Side of AIDS. This is a pseudoscience AIDS denial movie featuring music by the Foo Fighters. I believe Learn to Fly was in the movie. So we've got a sort of progression of interest to public support to distancing to a little bit of residual support to complete silence. That's it. Now, the last thing worth noting is that in that space of time, right? Again, I've said this I'm not actually implying they're responsible for this. But in the space of the years 2000 to 2003, almost 1 million South Africans died of HIV/AIDS related causes, right? So no, they didn't kill those people, right? They didn't. But the organization that they support absolutely played a role in those people's deaths, whether that be through the influence that Alive and Well and related organizations played on the government of South Africa, and how that possibly hindered or unnecessarily complicated what the health ministry of the country implemented regarding these things. And I don't think most of those 1 million, were listening to the Foo Fighters and decided to not get tested or not take treatment because of what the Foo Fighters said. But there's a very good possibility that things that Maggiore and Duisburg said reached the ears of these people and influenced the decisions of at least some of them. So ultimately, what am I saying here? Not blaming the Foo Fighters at all. Okay? That's the important thing that I want to make clear. I'm not accusing them of killing anyone. No. What it is when your support is that vocal and you find out you're wrong, I think your retraction has to be just as vocal. Yes, they've supported better causes since then, causes that support treatment of HIV, that support people getting tested. They've done those things, right? They've shown us, I suppose, that they've changed. But I do think it's important for them to go on record stating it, just because of how harmful and dangerous it is. But ultimately, I'd like to think they've done more good than harm, right? I do think that all the benefits they've played since then that support the right way to treat this disease, probably worth more in dollars and in lives than the bad of what they did with Alive and Well. I just think there's some value in a public apology for something this serious. And it's serious, in my opinion. It is. But hey, that's just my opinion.